All right, well, we are getting ourselves all situated and just managing the waiting room and letting people in and promoting our panelists to host. So thank you so much for your patience while we kind of got the settings on this meeting all set up. And we're just so grateful to have our second working group meeting for the second statewide agricultural expert panel meeting and here today. And I guess with that, would it be okay, Sam, if I pass it off to you to help us get oriented and then we'll have opening remarks from Karen Mogus, and then I think we can dive into the panel discussions shortly after.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Erica. And thank you, panel members and members of the public for joining this afternoon. As Erica mentioned, this is our second working group meeting for the expert panel. We expect today's discussion to focus primarily on continued discussion of the panel charge questions. If you recall from the first session on October 13th, the panel made good headway on working through question one. We are really hoping to get through that a little bit further today and move on to subsequent questions. We have a couple other items as well that we want to discuss. In particular, for those that attended, you may recall there was a pretty extensive discussion around information needs and presentation requests from the panelists. Because of the interest in this particular group and the real need to make sure that the panel has as much time as possible to deliberate on the questions, we are making sure that information requests come from the panelists and get transmitted to whoever the appropriate individual is from there, whether it's an additional academic resource or agency personnel, whoever it may be. So I just want to make sure that we note that in a few moments. I think we'll probably display up on the screen the list of panel requests for information and presenters that we heard last time. And we really hope to walk through the panel in a few minutes, kind of prioritize those a little bit. You'll see the list that was compiled by staff is quite extensive, and you have limited time together. So we want to make sure that you all have time to work through it. And I would be remiss, I'm realizing that our interpretation staff is online. We may be joined by some individuals who require Spanish language interpretation. We do have that set up, so I would like to turn it over at this point to our Spanish interpretation team to run through instructions on how to join that channel. Please.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Please note, interpretation services are being offered for today's session. To listen to comments, questions given in Spanish, please select the globe icon at the bottom of your screen that says interpretation. Then select your language, English. You will then be able to hear a live rendering of the comments in English. Thank you. Por favor, noten, se ofrecen servicios de interpretación para la sesión de hoy. Para escuchar el programa en español, seleccione el icono del globo en la parte inferior de su pantalla que dice interpretación. Luego seleccione su idioma Spanish o español y de ahí podrá escuchar todo el programa en español. Muchas gracias. Back to you, Sam.
Great. Thanks so much, Mike. And thank you to your team for once again providing support. We want to make sure these meetings are as accessible as possible for everybody. And I realized that I started getting a little bit ahead of myself. A couple of other quick meeting logistics. For those joining as members of the public, you'll note that you are unable to mute and unmute yourself. That's just because we have a very large turnout today. So the primary purpose of these discussions, as I mentioned, is really set aside for actual panel deliberation. We will have a very brief public comment section at the end of the meeting. If you would like to join, the queue, I'll run through instructions around 5:40 on how we intend to do that. All public comments will be limited to no more than 3 minutes. While we will make every attempt to get through everyone that we have today, just please note that there are multiple other venues to provide comment as well, including not the least of which is the full formal panel meeting scheduled for next week on Halloween, October 31st at 10 a.m. And that meeting will be held at Cal EPA. There will also be an additional public listening session, likely in the January timeframe, although we're still figuring out the specific scheduling for that. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. I do want to make sure that I kick it over to the expert panel chair, Dr. Daniel Geisler, for any additional opening remarks and just kind of setting context for the discussion today. Daniel, anything you'd like to share with the group before we get moving?
No, thanks for organizing the meeting. And shall we start with the discussion, or do you have other items planned before the panel actually starts discussing?
I do want to make sure to hand it over to Karen Mogus as well for any additional opening remarks on behalf of the State Water Board.
Thanks, Sam. I will be very brief because I know that you all have a lot of work to do. I'll just start with what I ended with at the last meeting, which is I have high expectations for this panel, and so far you are exceeding my expectations. The Water Board team and I have also heard similar feedback from others, including my board members, and it was great, really great. And I've heard similar sentiments to hear you all dive into the charge questions and to be able to start getting an understanding of your perspectives and expertise. So looking forward to more of that today. I also want to thank Chair Geisler. You did a great job preparing for and facilitating the discussion at last week's meeting. Really appreciate you stepping up to take a leadership role for this panel. And then I wanted to flag a few items we heard during the meeting last week before you get into your discussion. Sam already mentioned the request for information and other presentations, so I won't go into that. We also heard a request for clarification on panel charge question number 5, and I know the team is prepared to provide clarification on that question today. So Chair Geisler, if you're interested in engaging in that discussion, please let us know. We can add that to the agenda for today. Second, we heard interest in learning more about economic considerations, decision-making, and policy making. And I want to remind the panel that we're seeking your recommendations based on your scientific expertise. There's never a bright line between technical and policy considerations, and so it's understandable that you want to know how your recommendations will be used to make policy decisions. And so to that end, the team and I are preparing a presentation for you for next week at the October 31st panel meeting to explain how the water boards use scientific recommendations from expert panels such as yourselves. We do this all the time. And we take those and recommend regulatory program improvements and make policy decisions. And really the decision makers are our board members ultimately. As part of any rulemaking or permitting action, our board carefully considers economics, either because they're required to by statute, or because they have a keen interest in knowing what the costs of complying with our regulatory requirements are going to be. The expectation always is for us as staff to bring information about the economic implications of the proposals that we're bringing before the board. So I'll get more into that when I present at the meeting next week, but just keep that in mind as you're thinking about the questions and how you, what information you need to answer them. The team also took extensive notes and then collected draft text from panel members and provided that to the panel. We're just looking for your feedback at some point on the format and the level of detail that was provided so we can provide you as much support as possible. And then finally, as a reminder, you have heard and likely will continue to hear comments that are not directly related to the charge questions. And so just want to encourage you all to, and commenters, to stay focused on the questions at hand so that the panel can really deliberate on and focus on the questions and produce a product that we have very little time to get done. With that, I look forward to hearing your conversation today. I'll be listening intently and taking my own notes, and appreciate the opportunity to provide some comments. Back to you, Sam.
All right, thanks so much. A question over to Daniel before we open up the discussion. I know we had a couple of housekeeping items regarding the overall schedule for the panel and things like information requests and how we want to roll that out. Do you want to save that discussion for the end of the meeting? I think I had seen some earlier email communication about that.
Yes, we can do that at the end.
Okay, wonderful. Well, then we will turn it over to you. And I believe I know that there's an agenda in Spanish up on the screen for staff. I don't know if there's other materials you wanted to share right now, but we can probably turn that off and just chat with each other.
If I may show just one slide about the plans I came up with for today.
Brilliant.
So can you see this slide?
Yes.
So I think we will in a moment continue discuss the discussion on panel question 1, and depending on time or how far we get, then move on to question 2, 3, or 4. I would like to stop the discussion probably at around 5:30 before opening the meeting for comments from the public, and then discuss the following items. First of all, determine who or the teams of 2 will write the drafts for the final report. We mentioned that last time. It would probably be good to determine these teams in advance and assign specific questions. I think we should do that today. And then also briefly discuss the timeline, whether it is realistic or whether we need to schedule an additional meeting after the January meeting. I'll go more into detail there. And then a few things about the next meeting on October 31st. So I'll probably I'll ask my fellow panel members to wrap up the discussion at around 5:30 so that we can discuss these items. But other than that, I think we received the compiled comments we had on question 1 and question 2, and it was very informative. I loved reading the different opinions from panel members. We all look at it from a slightly different angle, and it was really very interesting for me. So at this point, I would like to open the discussion to other panel members and ask you, what are your take-home messages when you read all our comments, and how shall we proceed from there?
Right. Well, it's really an opportunity for the panelists to discuss things. So we can just go ahead and jump into it. I will note that all of our panelists have been promoted to co-host, and that's just so that you can mute and unmute yourselves on your end. For staff, I know that Gudu has joined us and is asking to be promoted as well. So if you could do that real quick, just so that she's able to join the discussion. But otherwise, it's really your opportunity to continue the discussion. I would just turn it back over to you, Daniel, and I can let you know if folks have their hands raised or want to chime in. But otherwise, back to you.
Thank you. And Hannah just raised her hand. I think you're still mute, or at least I can't hear you, Hannah.
Yeah, we'll get that figured out. I'll unmute Hannah in the meantime. Please.
Thank you. Sorry, I can't control the things. I was just raising my hand to say I didn't have the ability to start my video or audio.
Oh, thank you. We'll get it sorted out. Sorry about that.
And then Mike Kahn.
Same for Michael Kahn and same for Thomas Harder. I apologize for the technology issues. We'll get that all sorted out for you.
And for Richard.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, I can't, well, I don't know. Yeah, it says I can't unmute.
We can hear you now.
Okay, oh, good. Yeah, sounds like it's fixed. All right, great, thanks.
Do you have any comments, or what was your take-home message from reading our?
Hi, so sorry. Can we just ask that everybody's sorry, we're having technical difficulties. with the interpretation channel, can we ask that everybody select either the English or Spanish channel?
As a reminder, you can do that. And this is true of everybody joining us, including members of the public. Click on the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and select your desired language.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Is it fixed? Can we continue?
Yes, please. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Richard, do you have some initial thoughts or?
Hang on a second. Okay. Well, I actually I was raising my hand just to deal with the technical issue, but so just I was impressed with the comments that everybody made, and I think it gives us a good jumping off point for us for our discussion today, Daniel. One thing I would say, I think there's we're using the word limit a lot, and I would like to see us use target/limit, because I think it's premature at this point for us to be talking about hard limits. I mean, we may end up doing that, but I think just for this discussion, that's just a point that might be important as we go along in this discussion. We may split out, kind of similar to what was done in Ag Order 4.0, where they had designated targets and then they had designated limits, based on the criteria that they talked about. From my perspective, Ag Order 4.0 really provides a really solid framework for us to move forward in our work that we're doing. However, that discussion about limits and targets, that I think will come later. So I don't want us to have the impression that we're necessarily setting hard limits in this early stage of the discussion.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I totally agree. We can leave that open, or should leave it open at the moment. Ali?
Good afternoon, everyone. Just I wanted to appreciate, whoever wrote that draft, very comprehensive. I think they catch a lot of things we discussed. Perhaps we can revise those and make clear, in some part. But one point perhaps we can add, to answer that question. I didn't see that point. I don't know if any of us discussed that, but I think, part of that question one, is about scientific research and how really they impact the protection, the groundwater quality. I think we should add something like that. I'm not sure, we have a solid data set that shows consistent relationship between A-R and water quality. Perhaps it's good, we saw some relationship, but we also saw some inconsistent, relationship. I think that's part of the gap for research or continuing data collection, and make sure, everyone knows about that relationship, or if the majority comes from the contribution of ag water management. I think it should be somewhere there. I didn't see this in that draft.
Thank you.
But that was great draft. I really appreciate putting together.
Gudu?
Thank you, Chair. I do echo Alice's comments. I thought it was a really great summary. It was also great reading the different perspectives. I think we're sort of heading the same way, which was great. Just regarding Richard's comments, it might be helpful for us to get maybe on the October 31st meeting, really what is meant by limits in these questions and what targets means to the board when they post that to us. I don't think there was a question with targets. But it might be helpful to go by a definition for what the board meant when they put limits in these questions that was posed to us. I do think there was a comment from in the comment, they didn't put the names, but they have different perspectives. There was someone that mentioned that I strongly recommend that we do not wait until there's enough data collected for each and every crop to set those limits. And I do really agree with that comment. I think we have data to move forward with limits or targets or however, whatever that word would be to protect water quality. There's a component of question 1 that said protective of groundwater quality. We do know what that standard is. So how do we move towards that? In reading the responses, I thought it was very helpful. And there was something that just for question 1 that wasn't mentioned much in our responses that I was hoping maybe we can have some discussion today on. And it's really application limits, nitrogen application limits at the application points for different crops. And I wanted to highlight for us CDFA's FREP program. I don't think they presented to us, so it'll be helpful to hear from them. But the FREP program, they have fertilization guidelines for different crops, not all crops, but they have some fertilization guidelines. So also just thinking about application limits at the points when fertilizer is being applied to crops. But I thought it was a very great summary of question 1 and would aid more discussion into question 2, given that they're related.
Thank you. Hannah, you had raised your hands. Is your comment already answered?
Yeah, I had the exact same comment as Godu about the distinction between A-R limits and application limits, and just wanting to, yeah, have a conversation about that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So one question I had when I read or reading all our comments and then going back to question 1, and question is really about crop-specific limits that are protective of groundwater quality. And I was wondering, can we actually answer that question? Because basically from the 2012 UC Davis nitrate report that was authored by Thomas Harder and many others, we know what these operational benchmarks are. And these benchmarks really are region specific. They depend on water recharge to the groundwater. So they depend on precipitation, irrigation, and where available managed aquifer recharge. So these are really not, the benchmark is not crop specific, but they are for a specific groundwater basin. But we can use the benchmark to calculate, okay, in a certain area, how would that translate into A-R? And so I was just wondering, or some of the crops are already below that threshold, some are close, others are still away. I was wondering, for our discussion, should we also or more focus on how can we get there? So instead of thinking about what would be the limit, a crop-specific limit, what would be a crop-specific pathway to get to A-R thresholds that actually are protective of groundwater? That's just a question I'd like to ask others that came up while reading all our comments and the different views and then going back to question 1. Hannah?
Thanks. This is maybe not a direct answer to your question, Daniel, but related. I guess what might keep me up at night, is we create a revised ag order, or well, the water board does, and the effectiveness of it, I feel like the efficacy really is going to depend and require, I think, an investment in education and outreach more than has already been done. You know, for example, with Preservation Inc., it's just I'm on the Central Coast, so I'm more familiar. Like, you know, I consider myself an incredibly busy person, but I think they are even busier. And so having more resources to ensure that the efficacy of the order is met, I think is just really important. And maybe that kind of goes to your point about a pathway and meeting those thresholds. So.
Thank you. Guru?
Thank you. And thank you for your question. Just a few thoughts on the question. It says crop-specific nitrogen-related limits, and I wonder if we can think about it one way through the lens of application limits per crop. What does the crop need and what would the crop uptake? And then, thinking about that in terms of application limits for crops per region, which because different regions vary. I know this is probably easier for fields that have monocropping and maybe more complicated for, other fields. But that's just one way I was thinking about it. And in terms of that, there is some data available for some crops for how much a crop needs at pre-planting phase, transplanting phase, and then at maturation phase of the different nitrogen recommendations at those different stages. So that is one way I'm interpreting the question around crop-specific nitrogen-related limits. And then also the A-R is like, how much have you applied and then how much are you removing? I think the application limitation covers the issue of over-application of nitrogen if that is happening from the different nitrogen that's been applied, either synthetic manure or compost. So that's just one way I was thinking about that particular question, which would be crop-specific application, just what the crop needs to uptake at that moment, so you're not applying more. And then also accounting for what is present in your irrigation water. First, the source of that water, and then if nitrogen already exists in the water, if nitrogen already exists in the soil. So those different components and having limitations on what is additionally applied.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Richard?
Daniel, I thank you for the way you framed the question just now. I think that's really getting to the key of what we're going to be able, as this panel, of what we're going to be able to concretely, suggest to the state board. And in my mind, kind of what Goto was just trying to describe. We have practices that that we've worked on here and people worked on in other areas that I think we want to have incentivized somehow, through this process. So like the use of like when you're talking about fertilizing a crop, let's take a lettuce crop. That's something that I know. The amount of nitrogen that you put on that crop is dependent on like some of the factors that Goto was just mentioning, like residual nitrogen in the irrigation water, mineralization from organic matter if you're on a particularly rich soil. So these are kind of things that we don't necessarily, like when people say, well, how much nitrogen does a lettuce crop need? I always say, well, okay, let's look at the situation. It's kind of dependent on the factors that are there. And, So residual soil nitrogen is one of the key factors we've really focused on here. And so, you know, so I guess the way I kind of was hoping, you know, because in region 3, one of the challenges we're going to have is, you know, trying to lower that A-R, which is the sum of nitrogen added and removed over the course of a season in a field. You know, if you're looking at 2 or 2.5 crops over that season, that becomes hugely challenging. And so laying out and then having the factors that affect how much nitrogen that you use on the A side of the equation, that's important. But then also on that R side of the equation is important when you're looking at the whole year, you know, so the factors to incentivize the use of cover crops. And we haven't really talked about some of the nuances of cover crops. We've talked, you know, we had Dr. Brandon gave that nice basic summary of the use of cover crops, but there's other factors as well. So we want to, I think we want to, like you alluded to, Daniel, we want to maybe put forth these best practices. And then, and this is why I was interested in that designation of targets versus limits. I think that we have to also have a process for the growers. They have to have a target, and then we also have to be able to evaluate. We can't paint them into a corner. We have to have a process where they judiciously use these practices and see, and then we evaluate at some point, you know, how effective and how close can they get to those that A-R targets or limits that would be forthcoming.
Thank you. Mike, you raised your hand.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Daniel. And good job chairing. So on the question 1, I'm still have questions about the question, because do they really mean crop specific? Because that's really, to me, Central Valley focused, right? Where you have only pretty much one crop per year. So can we change it to, like, for physical land acre or area? So we're not looking at just one specific crop, but the combination of crops. Because I think it is hard to give any type of crop recommendation for nitrogen when you have carryover from the previous crop, because you have to take that into account. I'd hate to say this is the limit for lettuce, because you might come into the spring with very little nitrogen in the soil, and you need more. And then the second crop, we could use less. It would be, it might be an average, but we don't necessarily have, you know, lettuce following lettuce. It could be lettuce, broccoli, celery, you know, it just depends. And I think we're, you know, it's that question sort of is okay if you were just looking for what was crop uptake over the season. We know that, you know, for broccoli or lettuce, you know, typically what it takes up. And you could make those limits just not more than the crop takes up, plus a little buffer. But that's not going to be protective of water quality, I think. So I think it gets back to having these recommendations on sort of a physical land area. And that's sort of how it was set up in the ag order. There's other situation I also think we have to think about is with the nurseries and any place where there's sort of an impermeable surface or tile drainage system. You know, if we go down to Ollie's area and In Imperial, they have a high water table. That's why they have big drain systems. So what is leached actually just ends up in the drain and into surface water. And so that's something else I think we need to think about. And nurseries, you know, if they're have an impermeable surface, also we have substrate production now of berries. Also, they really have a surface discharge at that point. But I think the A-R still would cover those type of situations too. So, you know, there's these different categories of crops that we have to really think about. It's not all one crop in one location.
Great, thank you. Sam, you have a comment?
Yeah, just kind of a quick reminder, and please, Chair Geisler and members, and probably staff, most importantly, feel free to virtually slap my hand if I'm speaking out of turn here. But I just wanted to provide a quick reminder to the group that the questions themselves aren't asking the panel to necessarily come up with what the limit is. And I'm sensitive to the question, I think the very wise question that was raised by a couple of you about a definition for targets and limits and what that actually means. But the questions aren't asking the panel to necessarily come up with the number or an overarching number that could serve as a limit or a target. They're really focused on whether you feel, you know, given the state of the current science, is it possible to get there? Is it possible to develop those numbers? So that would certainly, you know, that's something that I think is going to take a lot longer than the tenure of this panel to come up with what that number is. It's more focused on the process, the scientific process on how to get there and whether there's enough information. So I know that's kind of dovetailing a little bit with what Michael and others just said, but just wanted to offer that as a quick reminder.
Thank you. Briefly, I think in my opinion, what Mike said, that it should be area or yes, area specific and not crop specific makes a lot of sense. If we look at A-R per year, at the moment, it wouldn't change anything for the Central Valley or for most Central Valley situations because it's one crop anyways. But later during our discussion, we will talk about cover crops. And if that will apply to the Central Valley as well, then probably even in the Central Valley, looking at the field over a 12-month period may make more sense than look at it crop specific, so that we can include cover crops. So I think, yeah, in my opinion, that makes a lot of sense to look at it on a 12-month period or whatever is the appropriate time frame. Thomas? You're still mute.
There we go. Thank you. Yes, thank you for these questions and comments. I would second that. I think we should really stick to a land base, and to that degree, somewhere in the summaries, there was a mention of the 50 pound per acre target or limit. I would call it if we call anything like that a per acre thing, should be actually a per acre per year target and not something by crop. And what I hear is that we all agree, more or less. I think we all agree, and I would propose that this is part of our answer to question 1, that literally taking question 1 is a no. There's no crop specific nitrogen limit that makes sense in this context. It's a field-based or farm-based per year limit that really controls what ultimately may be happening to groundwater quality, and that we capture that in our answer today, and then sort of evolve from there. Because I think a place-based or field-based limit We could discuss whether this should be, if it's a small diversified grower, whether it should be for every plot or whether it should be for the whole farm. If it's a large farm, should it be for every field or should it for the farm as a whole? I think that's open to discussion. From my perspective, the source area for domestic wells, which pump about an acre foot per year, is typically a narrow area that's several hundred feet long, maybe several thousand feet long. The source area for an agricultural well, maybe a square mile or more. And so what comes out of those wells is a mixture of what goes into these source areas, and having areas that are on the order of 40 acres or 160 acres as an accounting unit, as the smallest accounting unit, from my perspective, seems sufficient to do an overall assessment of the risk of that area to potentially contaminate groundwater. So I would very much lobby for having this area-based or field-based or development of any limits rather than talking about crop-specific limits. This is not to say that I don't think it's important for growers to perhaps report crop-specific data so that there's transparency and there's opportunities to do assessments and research, et cetera, et cetera. But I think limits or targets should be on the basis of on the ground or field-based, some kind of a spatial unit that is reasonable basis and on a per year basis. And then I think last time we had this discussion about, things happen between years, and I would also feel very comfortable to use things like a rolling average over 3 years, but on a specific place-based basis. And Daniel, maybe this is something we can discuss and see whether we can all sort of come behind that and whether we want to be, in which way we should be or want to be specific on the size of that place-based. My proposal on the size of a place-based limit target would be, it doesn't really need to be smaller than 40 acres for sure, and probably not even be smaller than 160 acres.
Thank you. Sam, did you raise your hand again? You're mute.
More as kind of a resource for all of you. I know it dovetails very much with question number 1, but also your conversation last time. I did want to point out that we invited Eric Morgan from the Soil Health Lab to join as well to answer any questions specific. I know we've mentioned the 50-pound number a lot, and I know his work is focused on regenerative agriculture. But I did just want to point out that he's available and on the line if anybody has questions for Eric as well. Eric, thank you so much for joining.
No problem, and I can definitely kind of keep you guys going if any other questions. I see Hannah popping up with her hand up. Hi, Hannah. Go ahead.
Hey, I was actually just wanted to clarify something Thomas said. Thomas, were you saying the minimum acreage should be under this regulation is 100 or 40 or something? I can't remember what number.
40 or 160. Sorry. It should be 40 or 160. Yeah. So, and that would be the lowest end. I think talking about a plot in a small diversified farm and having to develop limits on a plot scale because it's one crop and another plot is another crop. From a groundwater perspective and from an impact to wells perspective, setting limits at that scale isn't really meaningful. It's the integration or areas, it's a single 40 to 160 acre size thing that could impact, what happens on that scale may impact wells. Setting targets at the township scale, as has been done in the Central Valley, is also reasonable because that allows for much more flexibility, so I think, and I don't know that that we have to discuss the specific area size, but I think it's helpful to think about the scale of things and what influences the quality in a well, and then go back to what makes sense relative to farming and relative to limits/targets in terms of an area, if that's what we are promoting, as opposed to a crop specific. And I want to re-emphasize, I'm not saying that that there shouldn't be crop specific reporting. I think the crop specific reporting is very important to do the accounting and for transparency, but the limits or the targets shouldn't be necessarily crop specific. I think that's going to be a discussion that's going to have to happen within that farm or within that township in terms of how these, average targets or limits are going to be met among the crops that are going to be planted. And it might be something that the farmer plants within the farm, if it's going to be at the farm scale, to get to these targets or limits. But I think that the accounting at the crop level is important. The limits and targets, I think, should be on a per acre, as a minimum, of 40, 160 acre, probably larger basis per year on a rolling 3-year average or something like that.
Thank you for clarifying that. Is it okay if I also now ask Eric something, or?
Yeah, I was just wanted to suggest, shall we briefly interrupt our discussion and focus on question for Eric, so that.
Yeah, I see. Discussion. I'm not punching clocks here. I'm in a good mood, so we make sure that you grill Thomas before you grill me. So.
Good. So Hannah, if you have a question for Eric, please go ahead.
Thanks so much for joining us, Eric. Really appreciate it. I was just from your presentation, was that last time or the time before? I can't remember now. You mentioned that you were seeing growers you were working with the Soil Health Lab who were meeting that 50-pound target already. And I was just wondering if you could fill in a little color there and kind of talk about the context in which those farmers were operating in that led to that achievement.
Okay, so there's a couple things. I won't say that the standard, cool season annual vegetable production system as designed right now is going to be able to get to 50 pounds. In my work previously, I had a grower that we got to a little bit over 100 pounds, pretty much across the board. I do have a lemon grower in the Salinas Valley, and I don't know what Richard will probably know. I don't know what nitrogen removal is on lemons. It's going to be obviously, according to yield. But he's making his crop with 30 pounds of low urea as a foliar on an annual basis. And that is because the soil is supplying nitrogen. And I think it was Joji Morimoto that finally went on the record for the University of California this spring at the Plant and Soil Conference, where he said, a healthy soil can provide nitrogen for crops. And so that is going to have to be brought in. And when we start to think about fertility programs, we always think about feeding the plant. And that's where we start to run into the issues with regulation is we need to focus on the soil first. And so that's what the citrus grower does. His transition is he's only about 3 years in. And I don't want to misquote it, but I think that when we looked at the total organic nitrogen in the soil was like at 4%, which is kind of ridiculous, but really good. And so it is, that is nitrogen that plants take up. That's what they do in nature, that relationship between the plant and the soil, but it's not easy to accomplish. Irrigation water is a big component of that. And also just really doing a good job of nutrition. It's not just about nitrogen. And so that's one of the actual challenges that I kind of see, especially with all the SAP analysis we've done, is that we see a lot of excess nitrogen in the plant that's not even being utilized and converted to amino acids. We just see it free inside the plant. And it's even more obvious when you have a high nitrate well. But we still see a lot of shortages of phosphate and potassium. And so you're not even going to be able to get the nitrate utilization of the applied nitrogen until you have the nutrition overall applied. If you don't have that molybdenum up there, you cannot really synthesize that nitrate into amino acids and ammonium and everything else. So it's quite a big picture, but in terms of a grower, getting after nitrogen management, doing a good job of cover cropping, frequent testing, and really, kind of not even knowing what nitrogen's in the water and why it leads to that result, but really focusing on the soil levels of nitrogen to make your decision, as your soil represents the nitrogen that's in your well. Taking that biomass from the previous crop, we were making crop after crop, following broccoli and cauliflower with just whatever starter fertilizer they used. And even change fertilizer formulation, so like a 0.66 to get more phosphate and potassium out there because we didn't need the nitrogen. But growers, we like nitrogen, and it's kind of a quick fix, but it leads to other issues in the plant, especially if we have it in excess. So it's not easy. The reason I'm so in on the regenerative thing is, been playing in this water board regulatory space now for when we first got the first ag order, which was the late to mid 2000s. And the only thing that I can see that checks all the boxes compliance wise is a regenerative mindset towards soils and fertility is the only way that we'll be able to meet any of these things. And to me, our efforts at tillage, this goes back to a conversation I had with Richard 20 years ago. Tillage is a common denominator between a lot of the surface and groundwater contamination that we find. If we're tilling more, then we're actually disturbing the soil more, and then we're going to be moving more sediments into waterways and moving phosphate and nitrogen with it. If we're opening up our soil subsurface, deep, it's going to move right down to groundwater. And when we keep our soil covered, that doesn't take place. And so that's where I'm at. The regenerative thing, biology breaks the regulations that you're all working on. It's standard agronomy, and the new agronomy, where we encompass biology as a huge component, will be the only way that a grower can actually meet the milestones that you guys are putting in place. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you. Richard, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, thank you, Eric, for joining us today and being available to answer questions. One of the things, you just mentioned standard in the new age of agronomy. Could we talk about the standard agronomy for a second? Because your lab is kind of in my mind, it's kind of a model of what we need all growers, and I'm speaking specifically of region 3 right now, but maybe it's also applicable to other regions. But the methodology that you guys used, the soil sampling that you did, and then the decisions that you made about okay, based on this nitrate value that we just measured, how are we going to fertilize this crop? And you mentioned, you had broccoli and cauliflower residue and so forth. Could you just explain to us, just, on the simple kind of, procedure that you guys used, like let's say you're growing a lettuce crop, and the prior crop, this is the second crop of the year, prior crop was broccoli. Just walk us through what you did and the decisions that were made by the grower that helped them reduce fertilizer applications.
And so, first of all, I'd like to thank you for all your guidance and support, and Michael as well, because none of this would have been possible without you guys getting me started in producing the research along the way that we're utilizing. And so if we start to talk about, let's talk about the big biomass crops like broccoli and cauliflower. And it's pretty standard for us to do a sample of the top foot and then go back down the same hole and go to the second foot and start to categorize how much nitrogen is in the top 2 feet of soil, at that third side dress interval. And as a rule of thumb, if there's 200 pounds present in those top 2 feet in any combination, my advice to a grower would be not to apply more nitrogen, because that broccoli or those other deeply rooted crops, high biomass crops, have roots down there, and it's fine every other time. In terms of the sampling protocol, we're following the University of California standard protocol, 12 cores, kicking off the top inch of soil, down 12 inches. We're then homogenizing that in a bucket in the field. It's brought into the lab in a 1 quart Ziploc bag where it's homogenized again. And then I think we're down to like a 5-gram representative sample that goes in a potassium chloride solution that is then agitated, filtered, and then run through a Timberline ammonia analyzer. And one of the big issues I've kind of had with both test strips and cardiometers and ion selective electrodes, and we've been through all of those, those different technologies. Why I like this Timberline ammonia analyzer is this is not a perfect system. And we sometimes hit fertilizer, and we'll see it with an ammonium spike. And so if we see an ammonium spike, then we'll go back. I mean, if you're sampling after somebody's ran nitrogen to drip, we could pick up a high level ammonium if we do it the day after. But 2 or 3 days after, if we go back, that ammonium is then converted to nitrate, and then that spike is gone. And we're able to better categorize how much nitrogen is present. And so, go ahead.
So, Eric, you did this service for a commercial grower, and it was economically viable and agronomically effective.
We cut the fertility budget in half. We went from like 7 million to 3.5 million.
So like this lettuce crop that we're talking about, let's say, whatever guideline that might be out there that says, okay, you need 160 or whatever. What are some numbers that you were able to, based on this kind of testing?
I mean, for iceberg and romaine, following broccoli and cauliflower, not taking into account the contribution from the nitrate and the irrigation water, I mean, they were making crops on 20 units of applied nitrogen. And again, you guys have done the work. We all know applied versus removed. And when you get 300 pounds of broccoli biomass, remove no more than 80 pounds at harvest, you're leaving a lot of nitrogen behind, and it does become available. It is plant available nitrogen. And so that is a source of nutrition. And then it becomes a question about irrigation management, and making sure that that nitrogen stays where the next crop can take it up. And so that's a big part of it as well, staying on top of the water, making sure that you're not creating leaching events. In terms of the regulation, just to kind of restate the obvious for the group, rainfall is the wild card. Well, rainfall is the wild card early on, in the standard agronomic production system and model that we employ. That's where it gets to be really, really hard. But kind of some of the other challenges you have as a person making these decisions is you cannot afford to get it wrong. If you get it wrong, you'll lose the customer. They don't believe in the technology. And so there are actually times, and it's always made me nervous when you start to take a look at what the grower's done, what the previous crop is, what the contribution from the well is, and in your head, the math doesn't end up to be the number that you see. You got to tell the grower to do their standard program, because in other words, if you get it wrong, you're done. There is no room for error when it comes to nitrogen management and cool season crops. And again, pretty typical. We have that threshold at 20 parts per million. There's quite a bit of wiggle room there. I mean, I think that 20 parts per million is really sufficient for the most part. We don't start to see deficiency until we get below 10 parts per million in conventional, and really in organics, actually it's a little bit lower. It's like 6 or 5 parts per million in organic soils to when you start to actually visually see nitrogen deficiency. And so it's
Eric, can you quickly clarify when you talk about 20, 10, and 6, what you're talking about, these ppms? Because it's in plant material, or?
No, parts per million nitrate nitrogen is soil.
Okay.
And this is
Thank
again, this is Tim Hart's and Richard and Michael's work over the last 20 years that has really just been applied practically in the field, is all this is.
Thank you, Eric. I'm done, Daniel.
Hey, Mike, you raised your hand.
Well, I'll start off just saying I agree with everything I'm hearing from Eric. That, you know, the soil nitrate test is super useful. It's in our cool season vegetable systems and also in strawberries. And also I would say those thresholds have to be more, tuned, because the 20 part per million was a threshold for the first or second side dress in lettuce that Tim Hart's developed. But we found as you get further and further into the crop, closer to harvest, that threshold could be much lower. And certainly also in organic systems, it can be lower. But I wanted to also get back to what Thomas was talking about with this having these targets or thresholds that we're shooting for on a large physical area. I guess that would be a good way to sort of figure out the potential, I guess, leaching risk to groundwater of nitrate. I think, though, we would still need guidance for sort of cropping system specific production. So if you are talking about almonds or citrus or vegetable systems, we know there's certain targets that growers who are managing these crops very efficiently should be able to meet. And maybe that's something that, the coalition would come up with. So the targets could be a little different, depending on what the grower is producing. But on the whole, if everybody does their part, the idea is we get to a better water quality in the groundwater, right? So there's no way I can tell you that the cool season vegetable growers are going to get down to 100 pounds of N per acre with an A-R. It's going to be very rare, but it would be it might be plausible for maybe strawberries to get to 150, for example. So they can do their part. But we have to have science that shows that it's possible. And that's where the research is. So I think the targets might be something sort of cropping system specific, but what we're looking at would be on a bigger area, like Thomas is suggesting, where you integrate all those crops there and say, okay, at a whole, this is what our impact is on the groundwater.
Thank you. Gudu?
Thank you, Daniel. And thank you, Eric, for joining us. I do agree with frequent soil nitrate testing. I think it's very helpful. I was wondering if you've done work in other regions other than the Central Coast, and if you could maybe share more on the soil conditions in those regions. And I think just a general comment to our panel, it will be, maybe we can add this as a discussion item and probably in our recommendations about having the nitrate that is in the soil as part of the A side of that equation. This on the A side, I don't think for every region nitrate in the soil is being accounted for, but it sounds like just from Eric's presentation, it would be helpful to account for that. But Eric, I'm wondering if you can share about just what the soil looks like in other regions regarding nitrate present.
So in terms of outside the Salinas Valley, the only other experience for the most part, I've seen some data coming out of Yuma through a third party into our lab. We did quite a bit of work in Imperial a couple of years ago in organic production. In organic production itself actually causes some issues is because the nitrogen is usually also tied to phosphate and potassium. And so for an organic grower that does see high residual levels of nitrogen, they can actually hurt the crop if they just hold back fertilizer, because then you're keeping back phosphate and potassium that the crop will likely need. And so there is a challenge when it comes to organic nutrition as the source. It can be overcome, for the most part, but it's pretty difficult for a grower to, oh, we see high levels of nitrogen, we're going to go with a foliar phosphate and get some sulfate of potash out in the irrigation water. That's a lot for them to do with the speed and resources that they're moving. In terms of the long-term kind of prospect of having growers do better in terms of nutrient management, I don't think it's going to come from taking soil samples. I think it's going to come from technology. There's a startup called TerraBlaster that is using laser-induced spectroscopy that is measuring essentially all the nutrients at a depth of 6 inches. And when I had a conversation with a grower, and at one point I said, you guys, you don't like to use the data that I present you to reduce nitrogen, but if you buy this $1 million piece of equipment that does it automatically for you, you're going to go with it. And he said, absolutely. And so in terms of technologically advanced, concepts, TerraBlaster is going to be a great tool for better nutrition management, because it will do variable rates, it will do omissions, it will do all of those things and be incorporated into the paths that the grower's already taking. And so I'm really bullish on that technology long-term from a nitrogen management standpoint, and really just kind of taking the person out of it. Growers seem to like to adopt technology that creates an ROI when it is a technologically based product. So I'm very optimistic about the development of that. And once a grower sees that they can create an ROI and maintain yield with a different mindset utilizing technology, they will adopt it.
What's an ROI?
Return on investment.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, growers got to pay for everything they do right now. And so that's the way, if you want to help a grower, you have to find a way to save them some money and maintain their yield. It's the only way in the front door right now.
Thank you. Thomas, you also have a question?
Yeah, for Eric. Eric, thank you for joining us. I'm not the agronomist here, obviously. I'm curious, when you look at your system, your broccoli iceberg system, or whatever your sequencing, your cropping sequence is going to be, in thinking about these systems over a year or 2 years or 3 years, and considering the question that Guddu just had about, how do you think about the A side of the A-R equation respective to the plant availability of what gets returned into the soil from crop residue? Can you, or do you in fact run mass balances on that first 2 feet in cool season vegetables, where you look at the inputs over multiple crops, you look at what's removed over multiple crops, and you can come up with an A-R. And in fact, while it looks large on a specific crop, if you do that over a 2 or 3 year period with all of the crop sequencing that you have, do you do that? And what kind of A-R numbers do you then come up with for these cool season vegetables?
That's the success that we had where we were just over that 100 pounds of load. That was a 1 year period of time. And so, I haven't been able to see that over a long run. And again, it's just that winter wet period, where rainfall is an issue. That's kind of where a lot of it starts. And so really going into the fall, your last crop in the fall, you really need to make sure that, this is what I would guide folks to do, is making sure that you're not carrying over any residual nitrogen And if you are, by chance, something gets away from you, that's where you go with the cover crop. Growers should make the decision on where to cover crop based on soil nitrogen levels in the soil so that they can ensure that that nitrogen is recovered, and available for the next crop. And so that's what I would guide growers to do, because you can't be perfect on this. And we do see a lot of times, even when we keep the soil nitrogen levels in line throughout the course of the entire year, never getting over 30 parts per million, keeping it between 20 and 30 parts per million, we go to do fall groundwork, and then we'll test after they do the ripping and chiseling and put everything back into beds, and we'll see it go back up again because, inherently, that nitrogen distributed in the soil outside of areas that we pulled the cores from gets mixed up, put back into beds. And so, we are seeing numbers change with groundwork too. And we see it in celery, when a grower is applying nutrition through drip tape, and we're testing between the seed lines on top of the bed, and we don't see high levels of nitrogen. But then the grower, commonly in celery, will run a furrow water, to get a deeper moisture into the soil. And then we'll see that nitrogen move back into that testing zone, and we'll pick it back up again. So there's a lot of dynamics, that take place. And I've just seen so many darn samples over the years in kind of the context that some of the picture is clear for me. But in terms of a 3-year kind of situation,
And
I think that winter rain is your reset for the most part if you have a wet year.
yeah, okay,
And
that's good to know. And then maybe 2 more questions on following up on that. One is, do you see in your work the degree to which the nitrate that comes with irrigation water can be accounted for? Is it 100%?
It's 100%. It's nitrogen. It's 100%.
Okay.
It's 100%. Yeah, we've made crops on nitrate that's 10 times the drinking water standard in the well, only applying phosphate. And again, that doesn't work if it's raining, but if they're running that well, and we know that for every 8 hours of running water there, I think I did the math, it's 20 or 30 pounds of N that's being applied. And again, when I'm making fertility recommendations, some of it is grower mindset too. They believe that nitrogen has to be applied in a tremendous amount up front, and that they're actually holding back nitrogen. This is specifically to iceberg. They believe that you have to apply a lot of nitrogen up front, and that you're starving the crop of nitrogen at the end to get it to head. Well, if you take a look at the data, the number of crops that are starving for nitrogen in terms of iceberg lettuce that makes that head, there's none of them. We've all got luxury amounts of nitrogen at harvest. And so really the data doesn't support the mindset that substantial applications of nitrogen up front and then lower levels of nitrogen at harvest is what makes the head. And so when I'm making recommendations, studying all the work that Richard and Michael and Tim have done over the years, is I'll actually kind of come up with a calculation knowing that, in the last 3 weeks for harvest, I need to be planning on applying 2 to 3 pounds of nitrogen per day per acre. And so my fertility recommendations will actually be kind of predictive of crop uptake, because the university's published so much data and we've seen the curves to know what that is. And so there's, and I think that crop manage does this, it's basically doing some level of crop manage in my head, I think is what that is. So.
Thank you.
And then
Richard?
one last question on the
Thomas.
on the organic matter content. When you have these high organic matter content soils, that's a lot of nitrogen. I mean, relative to 50 or 100, when you have high organic matter soils, that's intrinsically a lot of nitrogen that's there. Now, most of it will be immobile, but how do you feel that with soil testing, you can deal with the dynamics of a high organic soil? Or does that just become incredibly difficult to manage what may be leaching out of a high organic matter soil?
So I'll just say I don't see high organic matter soils, and I'm not going to say that at this point in California that we really have too many high organic matter soils. I'm currently in Florida and been working in muck soils where they're releasing 900 pounds of nitrogen per year. And so they don't even apply nitrogen to sugarcane down here. And so, yeah, you don't see it necessarily. I think that where we see contributions is from previous crop, irrigation water, and inputs in the standard production system. I've not, there's not going to be a huge distinction between a 1% organic matter soil and a 3% organic matter soil in terms of that. I mean, it's there. It's there for sure, but it's not visible on a soil test with the rate that it becomes available.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. Eric, one of the things in the first ag expert panel, they did not put cover crops on the R side of the equation because they did not think it was a removal. And I think, well, that's totally correct. But I look at it as a transferring it from, in the fall, winter season of this cropping season to the subsequent cropping season. And one of the things that I think I've heard you say, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on it again, was that with all this nitrogen sampling that you've done, have you been able to pick up a signal of that cover crop mineralization in the subsequent crop that then the grower can use in reducing fertilizer applications?
It's there every time. It's there every time. Absolutely. It's there every time, and it's a minimum of 80 pounds. So yeah, it's there every time. And when it shows up is a function of soil temperature, groundwork, getting some oxygen back into that soil. Usually get some microbes going, and then you'll start to see more nitrogen become available. But even, if you were to have a November harvested broccoli crop, and then you plant your first iceberg crop in March, we're going to find that broccoli residue contribution on the second side dress interval in that iceberg crop every single time. It doesn't matter how much rain we got, it's showing up. And I just think that it's a little bit anaerobic, and it's just, if it's they keep that bed kind of sealed up, which they do, and as soon as they start moving groundwork and introducing some oxygen and that moisture is there too, then it becomes available. But pretty much up until, we'll say, mid to end of June, we're finding contributions from both cover crops and the high residue crops showing up at the second side dress interval. And then once you get into June, for sure, we see that show up as the first side dress interval. And so if you go from broccoli and you harvest it in June and you're planting in July, by the time you side dress that field, you're going to have a good bump in the soil. It's going to be very visible. It's going to be a 40 to 50 part per million nitrate nitrogen increase there. We see 200 pounds all the time from that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment that I didn't agree with what Godo was saying about that the soil nitrate should be considered applied in. It's a result of the application of fertilizer and other factors like mineralization and how it's really a transient number. And so that would really be a problem to include that in the A side of the A minus R equation. I don't know if anyone disagrees with me on that.
No, along the same line, I mean, we have to be careful. We cannot include every source of nitrogen on the A side, but on the R side only include nitrogen removed, because the crops need more nitrogen than what's removed. So we cannot include every source, but then only account for the nitrogen that's removed, because the plants take up much more, especially with the vegetables. Thomas?
Yeah, I just wanted, I think I know, if I understand Gudu right, I would agree with her on including the soil mineralization from crop residue in A. If you're just looking at the crop, if you're just looking, I mean, and this is kind of how I understood Gudu, is if you're just looking at that iceberg lettuce that comes in after the broccoli, and you look at that crop and you do the mass balance for the crop, part of the applied nitrogen is that residue that's now mineralized and becomes available to the iceberg. If you're looking at it over all of this kind of goes away when you look at it over longer periods of time, and you allow sort of a for annual or multi-annual mass balances where you then say, okay, I'm going to look at the soil as a box. And I think this is where we're going to have to be really clear in how we look at this and how we articulate what we're recommending, that we make it very clear what the system is, the size of the soil box that we're looking at, and over which period of time we're looking at that soil box, and what A minus, then look at what's applied and what's removed. If you look over a year, over a rolling 3-year average, the A and the R to me then is really just any amendments, any fertilizer, any compost, manure applied at the top, any harvest removed. And then you have changes that soil box and storage. And if you can account for that over that period, then you should get a pretty good idea of how much might be leaching out of the box. And there's a lot of stuff going on in between crops and over time within that 1 year or 3 year time frame. But we do have to be clear on when we say A and R, are we talking about a crop? Are we talking about a year? And that's where I think some of these differences come from.
Thank you. Do we have more questions for Eric, or do you prefer to continue the discussion now we have? Who has a question for Eric? Yeah, Hannah.
I mean,
Then after we can let him go.
yeah, it's not a question, or maybe it's to clarify something just in terms of this conversation about if residual nitrate would be considered applied. My understanding from what Eric was saying, that if you're measuring that residual nitrate, then, and there's a significant amount there, that at times you were recommending, hey, you can apply less so that your A term would be less. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, so we're using basically the soil nitrate test, with the kind of the ammonium component to help ground truth if it's an accurate sample or not. And then based on the level of soil nitrogen that's present, in kind of knowing the stage of the crop, the source, the nitrate contamination in the irrigation water, all of those kind of factors, I'm just doing crop manage in my head for the most part. And so, if I'm making a call, kind of depends on how far we are to harvest, how much is there, what is the weather going to be, what time of year it is, are we going to have rain, are we not going to have rain, does this grower over apply water to begin with? All of these kind of factors go into kind of creating that recommendation. But there's also growers that just, there's, like yellow light, green light, and red light. So it's like, if you get to a threshold, you don't apply nitrogen. And if you are in the yellow light, then we're going half rates. But it's, some of this needs to be grower education focused on understanding, when crop uptake occurs. I think that a lot of the nitrogen contamination that we're seeing is coming from the mindset that the lettuce needs a lot of nutrition in terms of nitrogen early, and then they overapply it and they continue to apply it, and then it's just out over time leaching out of the system. And so I know that I might have mentioned this in an email or something like that, but we need to find a better way to communicate with growers what's actually going on, because the messaging that we're creating isn't working. And so there needs to be a better path forward for them. And so the messaging, and again, compost and cover crops, these need to be incentivized, as part of getting them going in the right direction, of building soil health. And cover crops and compost are soil food, which is the direction that we need to start to take things regardless of the regulation. And as long as, you know, this grower is making the appropriate nitrogen input decision based on test results, based on what we know for crop uptake, based on what we know previous crop and nitrate and irrigation water, all of that, they should be good to go. But anybody that's applying, you know, 60 to 80 pounds of nitrogen at the first side dress interval in any crop is going to lose 80% of that first side dress, period, every single time. And from a standpoint of you know, the A-R model, they will never be compliant on that because you just lost that 50 pounds on the first crop and you're aiming for at least 2. So it's a complicated model, and education is component, and we haven't done it right yet. So I'm working with a startup right now that has a polymer product that they're aiming. They want to be in California, and it can, you know, reduce the amount of water that's used, and it can also retain some level of nitrogen. And I said, don't focus on California. Those growers are not ready to cut back on water or cut back on nitrogen yet. We need to find another market where that product can be effective. Because it's just, we go.
Do we have other questions for Eric? Okay, otherwise, thanks a lot for joining us again.
Daniel, I did have one.
Sorry,
I have one final question for Eric. I mean, this is such a great opportunity to, you know, pick, you know, Eric's brain because he's done so much soil testing. This is something that's probably going to come up, you know, later in our discussions. But in Ag Order 3.0, you know, there was the discount factors, you know, for organic fertilizer, because an organic, let's say you put 100 units of nitrogen out as an organic fertilizer. Well, depending on what it is, the nitrogen C to N ratio and so forth, only a certain percent of it mineralizes and becomes available on the A side of the equation. And so the question I have for you, Eric, is in all the testing that you did, and you worked with conventional and organic, do you have any comments about the nitrate levels that you saw in the soil between the two systems? And do you have a sense that this, you know, does anything come up for you? Like the question I have is, you know, how much, you know, does an organic system have the same level of risk for nitrate leaching as a conventional system, you know, vegetable system? And I was just wondering if you could just make any comments about what I just said.
I think that there's likely going. Pardon me? I think that there's going to be less risk with an organic system just from the price point of the inputs. You can't afford to over apply nitrogen for the most part because the cost of organic fertilizer is higher. You know, but that doesn't mean that organic is easy. You know, in cold, wet soils, you know, we're having to apply more organic fertilizer just because they're not actively making that nitrogen available yet when they're still cold and wet. So that's an issue. And again, you know, kind of with that organic input in the, you know, the soil biology and everything else like that, we are, you know, we see symptoms of nitrogen deficiency at lower levels than we see in conventional products, you know, conventional produce. So hopefully that answers your question, but you know, it's difficult for an organic grower to afford to over apply it. You know, from an economic standpoint, it's expensive. So
no, thank you. Thank you for that perspective. That's very important. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Eric, for joining us and answering all our questions. It was great. Thanks
Daniel, I think Engudu said she said. I thought she was waving her hand.
Yes.
I have partial, but we can move on with the conversation. I think not much of a question for Eric, but just a build up on some of the comments he made. So thank you, Eric. We can move on with the conversation.
Mm-hmm. So, please go ahead.
Thank you, Daniel. Just a few comments and like sort of Eric's last comments there. Not a question for Eric, but one about education, which I think is very helpful. And I saw that in our responses about this came out of the first panel. I think it's something we probably should have as a continuation in our panel around education for different growers and the different regions. I had another comment, which Eric sort of made there around over application. The way I see the questions, I have highlighted protective of groundwater quality and want to think about how we can get to that point. So any over application in any of the regions, I think accounting for that would be very helpful. But I was going to sort of move on to Thomas's initial comments on source area. I think you had like 40 acres or 160 acres in mind. I'm wondering, I think it's a great idea, just thinking about the way the questions have been posed to us, maybe looking at it as a plot level might be more helpful. But even in terms of on a plot level, if we have just one crop on a crop, on a plot, I think that is still crop-specific nitrogen limits, right, per acre. We're just adding the per acre part of it, is my understanding of that. And I'm not asking a question. I'm also just thinking through that idea of adding per acre instead of just having it crop specific. I think it's helpful, particularly like for small scale farms that have many crops, diversified crops. Some of them have up to 50. That might be also helpful. So just agreeing with that idea that Thomas presented earlier, maybe looking at it as a per acre. And then we do know that there's some regions that just have one crop being grown on like thousands of acres. So also accounting for nitrogen there. But I want to bring back the point of accounting for nitrogen applied at the application part of things, how much is being applied to each crop at the different stages. If we can also consider that as well as considering the acreage.
Thank you. Ali?
Thank you. Great discussion. I learned a lot from all of the panelists and Eric. And also I had a chance to work with Eric in the desert a couple of months. Two comments here. One about, let's go back to our original question. I think whatever target or limit or whatever we want to talk about should, to me, it doesn't make sense to go even with 1 year. There are many reasons you mentioned, but just to give you one additional example. If you have avocados, avocado crop is 1.5 year crop. It means whatever you do, you see the impact 1.5 year from now. So it doesn't make sense to go with even 1 year. I think we should not go less than 3-year average for whatever we are talking about. If you apply nitrogen this October, you see the impact in February 2027, not even 2026. So my recommendation is let's go with an average of 3 years at least for whatever we talk about. So the other point I have is about, we heard a lot about the differences between the regions in many things. But I have a fact, I want to share a slide about even the impact of crop residue from the previous crop contribution in terms of nitrogen. See how it works in the desert region. So another difference from desert, I think, is good to show you. Can I share a slide?
I believe so, yeah, try.
Thank you. So can you see it?
Yes, now. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think you talk about cover crops. As you might know, cover crop is not a common practice in the desert region. But now we see a benefit for it as a tool to manage nitrate and salinity in the desert, specifically during summertime. Or growers, many years in the past, they used to, immediately after the finishing off with the vegetables, they go with another crop like Sudan grass, like cantaloupe, some other crops. But the problem of water situation in the desert and Colorado River prevent them to continue this. The region, the irrigation district asks, so please don't do that much planting during summertime. So what is happening if they do that? So this research, show you exactly what is happening. So we did cover crop, Sudan grass as a cover crop, not hay crop. And then we went to lettuce. We went from lettuce, Sudan grass as a cover crop, and then lettuce. Let's see what happened here. So we took samples from the following part and also the Sudan grass cover crop part. Let's see what happened. We did this sampling. We basically did cover crop. We planted early April. We chopped it in mid-July, and we incorporated into the soil late August. So I have soil sample data shows for September, right 2 weeks after we incorporated cover crop with the soil. And another date, November 7, right before we plant the vegetable crop the next season. So you obviously see what happened in terms of nitrate. A lot of nitrate available in the fallow in September 6, but reduced significantly in November 7, because the grower did leaching, which is the common practice in the desert for the maintaining soil salinity. So the grower did salinity management, heavy leaching mid-September. What is happening? We basically lost 2/3 of nitrate available from the previous crop. So I cannot, go with the contribution of that even if it's in the soil, we think is in the soil, after we just left the vegetable. We just lost it. But in the Sudan grass, at the time, September 6th, the nitrate is in the lowest level because it's in the cover crop, the residue of a cover crop. And still the mineralization was not happened. So still we have it under control. And then in November, started slowly to show up in the soil. So my point here is, even if we want to go with the contribution of the crop residue from the previous crops, I think we need to be very careful. The region has impact on those, even, the crop residue. Thank you.
Thank you. So a strong point in favor of considering cover crops, and we will come back to that when we discuss question 7. So that will be a big part of it. So just I'd like to make a clarification when I commented on nitrogen in the residual nitrate in the soil. My impression is we need to distinguish between, do we do a nitrogen budget for agronomic purposes or for regulatory purposes? When we do it for agronomic purposes, meaning we plan a nitrogen application, nitrogen fertilizer application, then definitely we need to include residual nitrate in the soil. And I'm strongly in favor of actually measuring it or incentivizing measuring it and taking it into account. Where I'm not, I'm a bit more careful is including it into the regulatory A-R framework, because then that's a different thing, because the residual nitrate basically, or some of it, is from the decomposition of the previous residue, and that nitrate is actually needed to grow the residue again, because removed is in broccoli, it's only 30 to 40% of the total crop, but the crop needs 100% of uptake, so we cannot include everything into A. But when we do an agronomic calculation of how much fertilizer is needed, then it is a very important component and it needs to be included. If there are no other comments right now, then I'd like to come back to to the summaries we wrote about question 1 and 2. And I think some of the points many of us agree. And one point is we need region specific solutions. So we shouldn't have a one size fits all solution. It needs to be region specific, and local people should have an opportunity to adjust or to make decisions on specific to their cropping systems. But one of you mentioned that certain features could be the same across regions, and I think that's a good point. So we can find certain features, but still leave enough flexibility so that we can, or that the regions can implement their own programs based on their cropping systems. And I think also some of you mentioned A-R metric is a good tool. So we should probably stay with that and not come up with something else, unless you disagree. I just throw that out and then you can disagree with me. But that was kind of an impression I had. Several of you mentioned that A-R is a good tool and we can continue using it. And then many of you also mentioned that definitely research, outreach, and education needs to be a very important point in going forward, in achieving whatever limits, threshold targets there will be. It needs to be a very, very important component. When we think about the Central Valley, although only a few farmers were labeled as outliers and had to attend training sessions, so it's probably it wasn't on the big scale. But my impression is, based on the data we've seen, education alone is probably not enough to provide, or doesn't provide strong enough incentives for growers to really reduce improve nitrogen use efficiency and decrease nitrogen application rate. So probably it's one very important component of getting where we need to go, but it may not be the only thing. There need to be other incentives that are somewhat stronger for growers to really think about what they can improve and not just do what they have done for years and know it works. Thomas, you have a comment?
Yeah, on your suggestion that we look at A and R as sort of the tools to measure what might be protective of groundwater quality, I don't think we need to exclude other methods. My understanding of what's being done in the Central Valley is that there's neither an A nor an R. The growers are tabulating various nitrogen applications and soil conditions that are sort of counted on the applied side, and then they're reporting harvest, which is essentially the equivalent to the removed side. But all of that becomes part of a much more complex calculation that's done with a modeling tool, the soil water assessment tool, the Central Valley soil water assessment tool, which then does a physically and hydrologically and soil physically consistent calculation of, given all of these circumstances, given the type of soil, what is the leaching that happens from the bottom of the root zone. Which I think that's a very high standard to use to calculate potential leaching. Michael has the crop manage tool, which also is a very, at a relatively complex level, the A and R concepts, but at a much more complex level. And Mike, I apologize that I'm not familiar with all of the details, but I don't think we need to restrict ourselves to just A and R as the tools that are going to be used to set regulatory limits or targets. I think there are better tools out there, more complex tools that account for a lot of the complexity in soil systems, and they should be used.
So then we should probably include in our discussion at what level these tools should be used. Should they be used by growers, or more at the regional level to to determine, okay, how are these measures working or whatever is set in place. Mike? You're still mute.
Sorry. I want to bring up a case or scenario that we also need to consider with systems with impervious surfaces that like a nursery where they have a lot of different crops and containers. It's hard to measure R. And it's A minus R somewhat equals discharge of nitrogen. Is it possible there's an alternative for them where they could just measure what they're discharging or even show they are not discharging anything and maybe have an off ramp, from some of the reporting if they showed that consistently? I know that would be something for the water board to figure out, but if it's just much easier to measure discharge, why not let them do that?
Mm-hmm. And also we have question 9 where we talk about exceptions and different approaches. So I think that's probably a place where we definitely, or where we probably should talk about nurseries, because that's quite different system, and whatever we come up for large fields may not work properly for nurseries. So I think I assume it will come up again. Thanks for the comment. Hannah?
That conversation, I think this kind of goes in line with the not one size fits all approach, and really trying to give flexibility to the regions to decide what tool they use, and in what cases, if it's just, okay, for a nursery point source, we're going to measure versus a more process-based model versus mass balance. Something that comes up for me when I'm thinking about that in terms of the differences that we heard between the Central Coast and the Central Valley was that the Central Coast had the data published, or it was publicly available. And I might be wrong, but it sounded like in the Central Valley that was not. And I think when you're talking about these sophisticated models, they can not encourage trust by the people who are affected, or the farmers themselves. And so I just wonder if there could be something we talk about in terms of or maybe regardless of the tool that is chosen, that data transparency is needed, but especially if a region is going to go with a much more complicated process-based model. So that's just something I'm thinking about.
Thank you. If I may clarify, so the data the coalitions provide to the water board, the growers are not identified. So the growers basically are anonymous. So you don't know exactly which field it is and who is the owner. Each field is listed, but so you couldn't say, well, here is a well. Now let's look at the fields surrounding the well. That would not work in the Central Valley because growers are not identified.
Yeah,
the data is available on a per field basis, just anonymous.
Yeah, I think anonymized data is okay, but my understanding from the Central Valley was that it was really hard to get access to that data, whereas on the Central Coast, you can go to a website and pull it. Am I correct in thinking that?
Yeah, I think in the Central Valley, you have to ask the water board to get the data. And one thing that's missing, that was mentioned by several presenters, acreage data is not included or not included yet. So that's probably something we need to discuss, whether that would make sense to include it in the future. If you just have a field, you don't know how big it is, so you don't know what the effect is if it's A minus R increases or decreases, how strong that affects overall is.
Okay.
Thank you. Ali?
Well, I think, Daniel, it's good it will be beneficial for us to develop some methodologies, that sound. And then, because I thought about this, very much, I think our job is to develop the potential methodologies can be available and then recommend to the regional boards and their coalition to decide what they want to do or which methodology works better for them. Because as you can see, there are a lot of differences among the regions. Our job is just to develop the methodologies. For example, 3 different methodology based on the landscape, based on the crop, based on the, this, that, and then recommend, the regional boards and their coalition decide which way they want to go and which works for them.
Any comments on what these methodologies should be or could be? Richard?
I guess the thing that comes to my mind is, the A-R is it's a model, right? You're trying to model as best you can what we observe, in terms of environmental contamination or success in reducing environmental contamination. And I think, Ag Order 4.0 really, I think they did an excellent job of really trying to make that model as accurate as they could with the current knowledge that was available to them. So like the use of discount factors for compost and organic fertilizer, I think is good. And then like a scavenging, on the R side, for cover crops and that sort of thing. And I think that approach needs to be continued, and expanded. We talked about, the whole, like, on the R side, they had an R other, or no, they had an R treat, which was for the use of denitrification beds, where you run, like Mike's talking about, those impervious situations where maybe runoff water could be run through a bioreactor to use denitrification to get rid of the nitrate. But we did not really have in there, just the nitrous gas losses from fields. And that's an area, I think, as we make our recommendations, we want to keep in mind, technological developments and data gaps that we have in what we're suggesting. And maybe this expert panel model, I don't want to line you guys up for the next 5 years, for on the expert panel, but I mean, maybe it needs to be repeated at an interval to where we revisit the technological advances. I was at a meeting yesterday, spinach meeting, and one of the talks was talking about nitrogen use efficient varieties of spinach, which really caught my ears. Like, I went, that's something we really need. They're certainly at the very basic research end of that, that kind of research. But, these are the kind of things that are going to be coming in the future. And I think we want to, build into whatever we propose, these more nuanced aspects of the A on the A and the R side, and then any kind of technological development that could improve, that A-R model that the water board puts forth.
So an improved A-R then, yeah, would be one solution. Thank you. Ali?
Well, I think, Daniel, A-R sounds good to me, but there is something there my brain cannot digest it. And I think there is questioning, when you go to A, I think just compare a sandy soil with the heavy soil. So the grower cannot manage a sandy soil well. That's a part of the nature. I think that's not from the management. I think even a grower has drip irrigation in sandy soil cannot do a perfect job, like heavy soils. And it's not about management. It's part of the nature. So it means that grower, the A part for that grower is very high. But the R not necessarily is the same. So I think, I don't know, how we can deal with that if we go with that number and how we should be fair with that grower. I think, I think in that situation, this indicator may fail because, or someone says, that's not a good indicator, to evaluate nitrogen application. I think if we can find something, answer for that or do something around it, I think should be fine.
Mike, may I briefly comment on that? So I think one thing is, of course, soils limit what you can grow, or soils determine what you can grow. And I mean, growers in a heavy clay soil, growers will probably not grow potatoes because they know that doesn't work. So probably the same would apply to very sandy soil, that growers should not grow the very shallow crops on these soils. So that's one thing. The other thing is you can have a cover, or you could grow a cover crop to catch that nitrate that was leached during the season. So there are definitely ways to address that.
It's too difficult. And if you go with Coachella, they are one of our vegetable, production area in this region. They produce 10% of the vegetables. So how you want to say the growers don't grow lettuce? They have 3,000 acres, more than that, lettuce, just lettuce. So how we can say that? I don't know.
Mike?
Yeah, I think what Ali's saying is that the sandier soils are higher risk for nitrate leaching, and that's why the A will be bigger, which is exactly, why the A minus R metric works, to indicate discharge. And I think it is a good metric because it is helping the grower understand everything that's being applied and how it's contributing to their crop and what their target is, what they're shooting for, not necessarily limit, but, looking at the whole picture and what their risk of their management is to groundwater. It's something the grower can comprehend. A complicated computer model is not something a grower is going to be able to utilize in their own day-to-day management of their farm. It will be very useful for telling us what the risk is of, in general, of everyone working together in the area to the groundwater. I think that has a role there. But the A minus R metric is probably a good one at the farming operation scale.
Thank you. Ali?
Just to clarify, I think as a measure of regulation is perfect, but look at it from grower's perspective. The grower says, you are limiting me with, because of the nature of this soil, not my management style. Because it's hard to manage sandy soil, even with the drip irrigation system. I think from grower perspective, not from the regulatory perspective.
Gudu?
Thank you, Daniel. I think from the groundwater perspective, I don't know if I think A minus R is what we have right now would be helpful to go with A minus R, but from the water quality public health standards, I think it's still difficult to reach drinking water standards with that. I'm not in opposition of it. I think it's helpful what we have. I do think it's a better metrics than A over R. But I'm just also thinking about the drinking water, getting to that standard of protecting water quality. I think it will still be different and difficult. And because of that, the way I viewed question 1 and 2 is it might be a gradual decreasing process until we actually get to that limit, maybe by 20 years, for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, it has a timeline of 24 to 2042 to make all these changes to reach that limit. But I do think A minus R will be, a helpful metric, but just also considering, and maybe Thomas can speak more to this, like, would it help us reach protective drinking water standards across the different regions and the different soil types?
Thank you. I think that's an important question. How can we get there? If we use A minus R, how can we get to a level where we can say, yeah, we protect groundwater? It's definitely a central question here. Richard?
One thing I'm hearing very loudly, what Ali is saying, because I think it is it's the sad reality, of farming, and I know Ollie's been doing so much work, trying to improve irrigation efficiency and looking at drip irrigation on wide beds, which is kind of not used right now, but at least Ollie's making the effort to try and improve water use efficiency. So that's really, really important. And okay, this is the thing I think that's important. You were talking about the A side of the equation, but we're talking about a whole season, and so then there is that R side. And I think a grower who is constrained by a sandy soil situation, there are practices, such as we've been talking about, cover crops, high carbon amendments, these kinds of things that growers can do at the end of the season to hopefully mitigate some of that inefficiency that you get on that kind of soil. I was just one example, I was talking to actually a large farming operation here, and they've really increased their use of cover crops. And they've done it on these tough soils, and he said tough soils, and when he was referring to was a sandy soil. And so anyway, I'm just putting that out there, Ali, as a it's not all hopeless. There are some things that people can do, and I do understand the constraints to the use of cover crops. I mean, I get it. And I don't know in the Coachella Valley, what the constraints are there. Here, they're very real, and there's a limit, and there's a glass ceiling to their use. But anyway, I do think if growers are, if when we, whatever comes out of this whole expert panel process, growers are faced with, tougher targets, limits, whatever, that will incentivize creativity on their parts to find ways to use cover crops.
Thank you. Anna?
Mouse wasn't working. I just want to echo Richard there. And acknowledge just how, there's a lot of market reasons and socioeconomic reasons that cover cropping is really hard. And this might be unpopular, but I hear what Ollie is saying about, these farmers are incredibly, it's the hardest job, I think. And yeah, I wonder about, I think a lot of the time, these other practices that could help increase that R side and decrease discharge, such as cover cropping, can be limited by schedules and contracts. And so I'm just yeah, I guess, and this is probably way outside the scope of this, but just because it's something I've been thinking about, but where are the buyers and distributors in this equation? Because I think there's a role that they play too in the nitrogen issue. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. We have a great discussion. At one point, we need to. Oh, Thomas, yeah.
Yeah, so looping back to my suggestion that we don't limit ourselves to just ANR, but allow for some of these models. I think I can close that to the comments that were made. I think ultimately even the models like CV SWAT can be expressed as an ANR over a period of a year or 3 years or whatever it's going to be, and over particular parcel of land that's of significance. And my main point was I would not want to limit the metric to be just what the grower measures as an applied nitrogen, whatever goes all in there, and a removed nitrogen, whatever goes in there. I think the sophistication of what the Central Valley coalitions are doing with CV SWAT and how they digest what the grower reports in very approachable numbers. I mean, it's the nitrogen they apply, it's the soil nitrogen they measure, it's the harvest they take off. They don't even have to express that in form of nitrogen. It's their representative coalitions that then do all the number crunching, and it's then the model that these numbers are compared against, from which leaching numbers are calculated. But that is not to say that there couldn't be an A and an R number that can be reported from that, both from what the grower reports and from what what the model has, because that's ultimately the model also adheres to that same mass balance.
Thank you. So it's great discussion. I've been thinking about the report, or at one point we need to come up with some recommendations for the report. So I'm wondering what should be the elements to include in our recommendation for question 1 and 2. What needs to be there? What do we need to include there? Gudu?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. One comment that is coming to mind, or one thought, is the regional, including regional differences. And we see this in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of SIGMA, where we have groundwater sustainability agencies regulating a particular area. So local control, understanding that area, managing that area. And I think this suggesting regional approaches that would cover the regions that have nurseries, or what Ali has described, like sandy soil in one region, and then, the cropping system on the coast, which looks different in the Central Valley. So if we can put that in our recommendations, I think it will be helpful. I don't know how that would come out on the regulatory side with the board, but it'll be a helpful recommendation.
Great, thank you. Other elements of our recommendation, what should be included? What about what Richard said, A-R, but with the improvements we're going to discuss a little bit later for cover crops, scavenging, adjustment for availability with organic amendments, would that also be something to include?
So I think this is exactly where, something like crop manage or CV SWAT. And Michael, maybe you can chime in here and fill in the blanks that I have to my lack of crop manage. But my understanding of CV SWAT is that takes into account the cover crops, it takes into account soil mineralization, it takes into account denitrification, it takes into account the differences in leaching between a sandy soil and a heavy soil. But it ultimately starts with the data that are reported by the farmer. CV-SWAT, the way it's done is it's created this huge library of millions of different scenarios, and for that account for soil types, management practices, climate, et cetera, and essentially a particular field in a particular soil, particular crop that a grower reports with that particular climate and that particular management practice, with that information, the coalition people and CV-SWAT people go into their library, they pick out the simulation that's been done for that particular situation, and then can estimate the discharge. And they can also look at, what's the annual A and what's the annual R, what's the crop A and what's the crop R for that. But then it has all of this other information already built in as well, to actually come up with that discharge number, which then is used in the groundwater models to actually figure out, what this means with respect to groundwater quality down the road. And that's the benefit of having these type of modeling tools available. And I think those modeling tools provide, in the management of this A and R data that the growers are reporting, they provide a lot of flexibility. They provide for experts to be on behalf of the Ag Water Quality Coalitions, on behalf of the growers, to interpret these numbers, put these numbers through rigorous science, and then report back to the board on the various summaries that are needed. And it includes accounting. It also allows coalitions to then go back to their growers and work with their growers in accounting for the fact that they're on heavy soil or on a sandy soil. They may have a cover crop, they may not have a cover crop, and considering alternative solutions to perhaps improve their situation. So I see a lot of benefits to using these tools in this context, including using them in terms of what's being reported.
Mm-hmm. So it would really be a tool to analyze data and probably come up with more region-specific recommendations by the coalitions for their growers.
But also a reporting tool. I mean, it's also a regulatory tool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Hannah?
And I think just to go along with that, maybe a recommendation of anonymized data transparency, like the model that Preservation Inc. created.
I don't fully understand what you mean, not anonymous data, or what is your suggestion? I didn't quite understand what you meant.
Yeah, so to have data transparency around A minus R, like the Central Coast has done. I believe it's anonymized, I think. But there's like a website you can go to and pull this data from.
Aha.
Instead of
So
having
not necessarily include the grower name, but a website, or make access easier.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now I understand. Thank you. Mike?
Yeah, first I wanted to address the crop manage. It's not a regulatory tool, and it doesn't estimate nitrate leaching or discharge. It's strictly a tool for decision support for growers to figure out the right amount of nitrogen fertilizer to apply, taking into account other sources of nitrogen that might be available to the crop, and also for irrigation management. So I just want to make sure everyone realizes that it should not be associated with regulatory use, but grower use. And then as far as, what elements for question one, want to make sure we still got that physical area in there. And then for different, but I think for different cropping systems, there needs to be sort of a target of what growers should be able to achieve if they're efficient with nitrogen management. And maybe it takes sort of a local group to make a decision on that. Or maybe you look at the A-R data from over time, and as you suggested, Daniel, you say, well, most people can get below this, so you should be at least doing that. And then over time, you see if you can get better. But I think you want science involved and research to prove that any targets that are suggested are actually attainable. There's a lot of this in theory we think we could do, but it's not till you do field trials with growers, you find out what you're up against.
Thank you. Ali?
One question for Thomas, I think, because the question 1 and 2 is about, the indicator, either, the ratio of A to R to A minus R. So are you proposing to have something here for just using the tools, or, we should recommend that, you think? And if you want to recommend, a specific tool, because there are indicator or, limit based on those. So who wants to use those tools and implement and do the evaluation? Coalition or growers? Or I didn't get that. Could you please clarify?
Yeah, so in the case of the Central Valley, the growers are reporting essentially A&R. They get if I understand it correctly, they fill out a sheet for every field that they have, or for every orchard that they have. And they fill out a sheet of the nitrogen that's applied as fertilizer, the nitrogen that's applied in soil amendments. They do soil testing. They also report what the yield of their harvest. And they give these reports to the coalitions, to their respective coalitions. There's 14 coalitions in the Central Valley. The coalitions take those data and compare them against CV SWAT simulations for that particular crop, that particular soil, that particular climate, that particular slope that the grower has used, the particular application rate, and the particular harvest, which sort of stands for the management practice, and essentially picks out of these millions of CV SWAT runs the one that most closely matches that particular situation, to then look at, oh, this is how much leach, this is how much denitrification there would have been given the soil and the soil type. Here's potential nitrogen storage changes that need to be accounted for. And the leaching that is then used to assess the long-term, the overall leaching out of the township is actually the leaching that comes out of CV SWAT. It's not the leaching that comes from the A-R numbers that the growers may have reported. But you could bring it all back to that, because even CV SWAT has that A-R balance. And in fact, I'm not sure, this would be maybe worth a presentation from Ken Miller, who's doing the CV SWAT and who's working with the coalitions on doing this, to share with us how CV SWAT fits sort of into this A-R or in this A&R reporting in the Central Valley Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, and how then targets or limits are being used.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hannah, and then Richard, and then probably we are out of time afterwards, but please go ahead, Hannah.
I think to be included, if we're still talking about what should be included in the report, I really like the field level, not the crop level, but field level, and also what Thomas said about having a size to that and a footprint to that, that it doesn't, if you have a 40-acre operation, then perhaps you don't have to report. And then also just I think the way that the ag order on the Central Coast has worked, there's a lot of empirical data that is used for calculating A&R, But I think to Thomas's point, from what I understand, is it doesn't take into account the kind of soil physics aspect. So what we're talking about with texture, you're not going to get that dynamic of an A-R number from the way the ag order currently is written. Whereas with the SWAT or CV SWAT model, you do. So yeah. But again, I think it should be, you know, there's trade-offs with more complicated models versus ones that are more transparent.
Yeah. So yeah, I think a combination is probably a good way, and I think we should include it. We can also, at one point when we get to question 4, when we talk about other method and metrics, that's at one point we might probably say, okay, let's move that to question 4. But at the moment, let's keep it so that we won't forget it. That modeling can complement and make more sense out of the data that is reported for A-R. Richard?
So, the question does ask what are the, well, it asks what are the limits. I would say what are the targets, limits that we can propose. And now speaking specifically for Region 3, which is what I know, I really think the 50-pound proposal, for this region, we're not there. We are not there, in terms of the agronomy and the economics of this, cropping system, this double crop, triple crop, cool season vegetable. So if we're not there, are we at 100? Are we at 200 or 300? And
Richard, can you clarify, this is 50 pounds per acre per crop
year.
Or per year? Per year.
Yeah,
Thank you.
per ranch, so a unit area that like
over a
Michael
ranch
has been
unit.
talking about.
Yeah.
And that, so then the question is, so how do you, what should the target be? And so how do we approach answering that question? And my thought is, just from working with growers all these years, and that's why I was happy that we had Eric speaking with us today, because that's what he has been doing is part of the solution. Having a good access to information that helps the growers make decisions about fertilizer in season. This is real basic aspect of the whole thing. And so if we could incentivize, if it could be proposed to incentivize a program where growers earnest and judiciously do this, and then at the other end of the season they earnestly and judiciously use cover crops as much as they can. And we've already seen movement in that direction. So it can happen, and it's starting to happen. So what we want to somehow, and I there's different models out there. There's the grower to grower, the coalition education efforts that, on the east side of in the Central Valley they've been doing. And I think that's what we need to try and see what can these growers do, and then what, get, and then have a follow-up evaluation, similar to what we're doing, that looks at, okay, we have the data, we know that in general, because we have a lot of cropping systems. We have, Eric was talking about, broccoli, following broccoli with lettuce and stuff like that, but we have all these other crops, and spinach is the hardest one, shallow rooted crop, so there's some really tough crops out there that, to get good agronomic production efficiently is very difficult. And so anyway, we just need to approach that's what I would recommend. That's how we approach figuring out what is the limit for a region like Region 3. You know, is it 300? Is it 200 with current technology? And then what can we do further in the future?
Thank you. Thomas, very briefly, we have
I was just gonna ask Richard.
Go ahead.
I very much appreciate how you sort of pitch this, and you know, in terms of it's difficult, it's impossible right now to get to the 50-pound target limit. So what we do want is we want, as you said, you know, an earnest and judicious effort from the grower, and both in terms of what they're applying, how they manage the water, how much nitrogen they apply, and you know, using cover crops to the best extent possible. The question that we need to ask ourselves is how we get there. My question to you is, you know, if we look at the range of A-R that we see among growers, and specifically in your region now, and we have that on the dashboard from the Central Coast Board, does it make sense to say, you know what, there is half the growers are going to be on the left side? Does it make sense to say that the growers that are on the higher side for A-R, on the 50% higher side, they within 5 years should all be able to get to the other side? And is it 5 years or is it 10 years? And then can we do that one more time and maybe another one more time, so that in, you know, if we go through 3 5-year cycles now, you know, and we do it a 50-50 rule, in 15 to 20 years, everybody is where today's best 10% growers are on a given soil, because the soils and the climates are going to be the limits. That maybe this can be classified by soil type and crop type and climate location, but that we do use sort of this peer performance as a way to improve overall grower performance on the A-R.
Yeah, I don't have a good, you know, number for you in terms of, you know, how many years and all that. But I do think what we do need is an earnest effort. And you know, in all honesty, I think there's, you know, it's been spotty in that regard. And if we could just get everybody, you know, using the current practices that we have, you know, and then I think we might surprise ourselves, you know, how, you know, what it might look like. And then you know, how long that should be. You know, in Ag Order 4.0, they had some ratcheting down, you know, over a certain number of years and so forth. I'm not sure that's the best, you know, model. I mean, that's, you know, that was, you know, that's a question, but I don't know that it would take 15 or 20 years. I mean, I think we would want to make this effort, you know, over the next, you know, I'm not going to throw out a number, but, you know, we could do it quicker, I think, is my sense of it. And then there's new technologies coming. I was talking to an ag service person yesterday, and you know, some of these, you know, like I did a lot of work on nitrogen technology. So like, you know, some of the nitrification inhibitors, slow release fertilizers, some of these sorts of technologies really haven't been used very much yet, and they might have a role. So I mean, the point I'm making is that there's technology coming that's not that far away, that could also help us further improve, you know, after this first iteration.
Thank you. Mike, very briefly.
Well, I just wanted to get to what Thomas was saying, that I think it has to be a combination of, you can look at the data that the growers report, but we also have to combine, you know, the science, you know, based on research and showing in the field what's achievable. And, you know, we should have a target of what we would like to get to, but also sort of a another base target where most growers should be below that, So I see sort of like two targets being involved. One that everyone should be able to achieve. And if you're above that, you probably need some help. And then another one would be if we could use better technology, better management, or better practices, maybe we can push it down a little bit. And that lower one, if anyone gets close to it, should get some sort of incentive. And that's where I'll leave it.
Thank you. I think we'll probably continue that discussion next time, but last time we said we should determine the teams of two who are going to write drafts for the report. And we said we should do that today. So are we ready to commit ourselves to writing drafts of the final report to specific questions? I have the questions here with a short comment what they are about, but you all have the detailed questions in front of you. So who would volunteer tackling, once we have completed the discussion, tackling one or two of these questions? Just writing a draft for the final report.
So Daniel, do you want to assign one per question or a couple of people per questions?
People, but we cannot mix the teams. That was we were told last time. So the two people who, let's say, deal with question one, if they want to deal with another question, it would have to be the same team of two. But if we could fill that table today, I think that's what we determined last time would be good to do that. Thomas?
Yeah, I'd be willing to tackle 5 and maybe 9 or 4.
I'll go number 1 and 9.
So 9 you will be with Thomas. That means you would also do 4 and 5.
Oh.
Ali.
Oh.
Or
I'm saying 9 or 4, not both.
9 or 4.
Yeah.
All right.
Ali?
Okay. 9 and 4 should be fine.
So the two, Ali and Thomas, 9 and 4. Hannah? I can hear you.
Sorry, I was just hesitating. I'm interested in 1, 2, and 7. Yeah. But not all of them, but just to see who else.
Actually, that's exactly what I was thinking too,
I was
by the
hoping
way.
you were going to say that, Richard.
Well, no, I mean, wow. Okay.
1, 2, 7?
1, 2, and 7 is what I was thinking.
And well, you can determine the order or who would lead the effort. Gudu?
I would volunteer myself and Ruth for 8, given that we work on small farms.
Yeah.
Ruth isn't here, but I think she'll be fine with that.
I think so too, yeah.
And then maybe 3. So it still has to be Godo and Ruth, it sounds like. So maybe
yes, that's what we heard last time.
3 or 5. Yeah.
And who's missing?
You and me.
Oh yeah, Mike. What about, shall the two of us tackle 5 and 6?
I suppose so, yeah.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Oops, what am I doing?
So Daniel, not that I want to push back. I was saying I would like to do 5 and then either 4 or 9.
Yeah, just 1
Part of
second.
5. Yeah.
Oops. I made a mess here, but I'm okay. Sorry, Thomas. What did you say?
I had said that I would be willing to help with 5 and then either with 4 or 9.
4 or 9. So then should we switch?
If that's possible. I mean, if
Thomas
that's
and Arden 5, Mike and myself 4. Does that sound good for you, Mike?
Yeah, but I thought Thomas wanted to do 4 because of all other metrics. I mean, it's fine. I mean, we all get to comment on all of these,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, it's really just about a draft.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't feel super hard about this.
So does that look good for the moment?
That looks good. Thanks.
Everybody agrees? Okay, great. I'll send it to Sam and the water board staff so they can put it online that we will remember it. Then the next item we need to discuss today.
Daniel, I saw Hannah has a hand up. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, didn't see. Sorry, Hannah.
I just a question. Are we writing these like live in front of everyone or okay?
So no, the idea would be after we conclude the discussion on a question that the team of 2 will write a draft and then send it to everybody, and at the next meeting we would make adjustments. That would have to be live. You cannot send it to all of us and then all of us comment to you. So the broader discussion where more than 2 are involved needs to be live. But I think it will be much easier to have that discussion live when we have a good draft written by 2 of us. So the draft will be written between 2 meetings, and then we have a discussion and at the next meeting and try to improve it. And either we can do it live, or the team of 2 will incorporate the comments for the next meeting, whatever works best. I think that would be the idea. Okay, then one more thing. Oh, Ngodu.
Can I just make a quick comment on if it's possible to keep what we had for question 1, where Sam and the team were able to compile all the comments from each different perspectives and then share that with folks that are writing. I think that will be helpful for each of the questions we deliberate on.
I think the idea is that we'll certainly do that during these working group meetings. This just gives you the space to work on the questions outside of the formal meetings as well. And I can't take credit for any of the summaries. That was 100% water board staff.
Thank you. The next thing, so we have several meetings planned. A full panel meeting on October 31st, and then we have 4 working group meetings like the one today in November, December, and then in January. At the moment, January 14, that's our last meeting that's planned. And I would like to ask Erica or somebody from the water board to let us know what does that mean if January 14 is our final meeting. When do you need the final draft from us so that you can spread it and invite comments from the public? And I think based on that timeline, we should then decide, do we need another meeting because we need until January or whatever to finish our draft?
Hi, this is Annalisa Kihara at the State Board. Maybe I can help with that. I think given this schedule, if we're looking to conclude the panel in January, we would like maybe a draft report in December. Now, having said that, if the panel can have a draft set of recommendations completed on or before January 14th, there's an option for us to shift slightly and maybe use the January 14th as a hold, the hold that we currently have as a workshop to discuss comments and questions. That's one option. And then push out the final meeting to February, or if not early March. I guess the question for the panel, given kind of we've had 2 working group meetings, have been able to get through about 2 questions. If more working group meetings are needed, that's something that we can discuss and we can certainly accommodate if needed.
Thank you. So how confident are we that we can have the final report ready by early December?
It's too difficult.
So
Possible.
should we shoot for January 14 or allow us time to work on it on January 14 on the last details, and then ask the water board staff to schedule another meeting where we complete the entire process? Richard, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at I thought we were going to have another listening session, and
that's
the
October 31st.
What's that?
But listening session, but I think it's going to turn into a listening session because we ask for so many people to present us data. So probably for October 31st will be quite a bit of the time will be presentations.
Okay, all right.
So there will be a second public listening session. It has not been scheduled yet. The October 31st meeting is a panel meeting, although of course there'll be an opportunity for presentations as well. So I just want to make that clarification.
I didn't know that. Okay.
I guess the listening session should be earlier rather than later, in this whole process, like sometime in November.
Thomas?
I was gonna say, one, I was gonna ask that we do, in addition to our requests from last time in terms of what we needed to hear, I think after the discussion today, it might be really helpful to hear sooner rather than later, maybe from both somebody in the Central Valley and somebody in the Central Coast. I'm thinking in the Central Valley might be Ken Miller, but sort of do a side-by-side comparison on how Ag Order 4.0 and the Central Valley value calculation and target calculations compare to each other, and how they fit with the answer to these questions, or how they actually answer the questions that were given. So if there could be sort of a joint presentation by Central Valley and Central Coast to sort of do that, I think it would be really helpful for us sort of in our deliberations and what we're writing down. And then Sam, when you say October 31st is an expert panel meeting, is that a working group meeting, or what's the difference between a working group meeting and a panel meeting and a public listening session?
That's a good question. I wish I had my deck open from the first meeting, but when we initially pitched this process, there were sort of 3 primary venues. The first was the formal panel meetings where you have the opportunity to actually approve things, like you approve the charter and other documents, and eventually at some point you will approve recommendations as well. There's also an opportunity during those meetings for presentations. And we have a couple of those lined up for your panel meeting on the 31st, including a presentation from CDFA staff on the FRET program and the regulatory presentation that was requested at the last meeting. So those will be kind of informational items, but for October 31, we expect a significant portion of that to be a continuation of these working group discussions and an opportunity for you all to deliberate further on the questions themselves. So that's the panel meetings. They're the more formal sessions. In this case, hopefully you all received my reminder last week with location information. It will be held at CDFA in that same coastal hearing room. The public listening sessions are really an opportunity for you panelists to hear primarily from the public. So if you recall on October 1st, Oh, I'm sorry. I might have said something. Cali, PA, is where the meeting next week will be, in the Coastal Hearing Room. The listening sessions are an opportunity for you all to hear directly from the public, primarily either through presentations or through public comment, similar to the format that was used on October 1st. And then finally, you have these working group meetings where it's really just an opportunity for you all to discuss in a more informal setting and continue kind of hashing out responses. But I'd really look to Erica to provide any additional detail. I'm not sure if I missed something. The differences between those three venues that we have set up and kind of explained back at your August meetings.
Yeah, no, Sam, I think that was a great clarification. I think the only thing that we could maybe add is just that that if you decided to take a little bit more time and we converted the January 14th meeting from your final plenary meeting to something else, it could be a workshop to go over the draft final report. I think an important clarification, hopefully that the panel, I don't know if it's been clarified yet, but your draft report will need to be shared with the public for 30 days. And so we'll want to get your draft report, and then we would put it out for public comment. And then if we were able to issue that before something like the January 14th meeting, then the public could come to that meeting, and it could be a day where the public could ask you guys questions or provide their feedback on the draft materials that they've seen to date. And then they would, at the end of that public comment period, be given the opportunity to provide written comments that we would then help summarize, and then you guys could take into consideration. Not that you have to respond to the comments or anything, but that you would have the opportunity to get that feedback and consider it in your final report. So so that's just sort of like a offer on the table that then the January 14th would become like almost like a workshop for the final report. And then, you guys, and then we would plan for another final plenary meeting where the final report would likely be finished at that point.
Thank you. So should that be our plan, to have time until January 14th to work on the final report, and so add one more meeting? Gudu, what is your opinion?
Yes, I think adding one more meeting makes sense, just given the timeline.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can make a quick proposal, since you do have the panel meeting scheduled for next Friday, October 31st, if we staff can present kind of a proposal to all of you and just give us a thumbs up at that time. So we have it written out and just in front of you based on all the feedback you've provided today. That would be wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And it'll be quite brief.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then just
Can I just quickly make a comment, Chair?
Yeah.
I was going to second the request to have the CV SWOT model presented sooner rather than later, particularly because I think that model has been used to develop the formula, groundwater protection formula, groundwater protection values and targets. So it will be helpful to have that presentation, just understand how that is meeting groundwater quality protection.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Sam and Erica, could you work on that or invite the people?
Yes, and I'll note that one thing we didn't have a chance to talk about today, you had a pretty extensive list of different presenters you wanted to hear based on your discussion at the last working group meeting and comments that we received from some of you outside of meetings as well for additional information. I'd like to suggest that maybe we present that whole list to you on October 31st, and again, just walk through it and highlight what you would like to see happen sooner rather than later, and then staff can work to get those set up.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Then one question for the October 31st meeting, Richard and Hannah, do you think you have enough information to start writing a draft we could discuss, or is it too early? Should we continue the discussion on October 31st, or do you think you have something you could write up? We can then base our discussion on next time for question 1?
I think we've got a lot of feedback today. Hannah, I don't know where you weigh in, but we could, we have something that would be then subject to everybody's input.
Yeah, that would be great if you agree to put something together. We could use the same process that you then send it to the water board staff, and they could send it to us the day before, or so that we can have a look at it. And it would be great as a basis for discussion if you don't feel too stressed out about writing that on such short notice.
Yeah.
I will try my best. I have multiple presentations next week that I have to give, including in Sacramento. So, but maybe Richard and I can connect. Could it be kind of an outline, or I don't know?
Anything, focus on draft, or really stress draft. It doesn't have to be the final version where we just correct a few typos. So it's just something we can continue working on.
Okay.
Okay, then I think probably next time we'll definitely continue with question 1 and probably be prepared to tackle 2, 3, and 4. Because next meeting, October 31st, that's a whole day, or starting from at 10 until 4 p.m. So we will have quite a bit of time for discussion. And then just a brief question: who is planning to attend in person or going to Sacramento for that meeting? Or is anybody planning to go there? Richard, Ali? Ngudu too.
And
Thomas?
Yeah, I'm not sure yet. If I may be traveling that day, if in that case I would watch the recording. But there I will go.
So just for meetings where some people are in person, others on Zoom, are always a bit challenging, but probably the best way would be, if possible, if you could bring your own laptop and then connect with Zoom so that everybody is on Zoom and we can see each other. Those who are there in person and those who are on Zoom. Because the setup, if those who were in that room, if you remember, the panel members are sitting in one line facing one direction. So it's really hard for the panel members to discuss among themselves. So if that's possible, if you can bring your own laptop and then connect to Zoom, that may probably be the best way to have a discussion.
Yeah, apologies, I'm not able to make it in person on that date. So I'll be on Zoom.
Okay. Do we have other topics we should discuss before we open for public comments? Okay, then. Thanks everybody for the discussion. It was really good again, very informative. And so now, Sam,
Okay. Well, thank you all. Really appreciate you staying on, and thank you to all the members of the public. I know that we're a few minutes over, but we do want to always set aside a little bit of time for public comment. We received one request from Tien Tran for a little bit of time for public comment. I don't see Tien on anymore. So just very quickly, the way this will work, I think everyone's been through it at this point, but I would ask that if you're a member of the public and wish to comment, please use the hand raise feature. You can find that at the bottom of your Zoom controls. Just click raise hand. We would ask you to limit your comment to no more than 3 minutes. Because we're a little bit behind, we will go just a few minutes late. I will be pretty strict with timelines, with time limits. So at 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I'll give you a warning to conclude your comment. And then at 3 minutes, we will have to move on to the next speaker. So at the top of my list, I see G. Ludwig. If you'd like to introduce yourself and provide your comment, that would be wonderful. Go ahead. G. Ludwig, you should have there we go.
Yes, Gabrielle Ludwig with the Almond Board of California. amazing conversation. My head's spinning a bit. Just a couple of thoughts as the committee work group thinks about it, and as I'm listening, reflecting on the conversation. I do think Thomas has got a point that in terms of groundwater protection, looking at modeling that includes the soil and other variables is, from the groundwater perspective, the way to go. And then having a separate way of how do growers think about what they're doing. But keeping those two things somewhat separate, I think, is valuable, because one is really getting at what gets into the groundwater. The other one is really more about how do you help growers manage their fertility better. But the other thing that I think we heard really in the conversation today is the complexity of coming up with any kind of numbers or goals or standards because of the complexity of working in a natural ecosystem. So I think something else for the panel to think some more about is how do we provide information about the quality of interventions to improve nitrogen use efficiencies, both from an agronomic perspective, but also from including them in these models. So currently the Central Valley Regional Water Board's model, and I forget the proper name for it, the Irrigated Lands Program, I don't know how much it does take into account improvements in soil organic matter that may slow down, improve water holding capacity and slow down nitrogen leaching, giving the plants more time to get to the nitrogen before it moves somewhere else. So I think thinking some more about how do we help, as you say, move us all in these directions with the complexity that we have by having some kind of quality, like, yes, this is something we know makes a difference. We think the data is strong enough. This still needs some more. This is still out there. And I think the other thing, as was noted, is there really has been a lot of change just in the last 10 years in tools available to growers, whether we're talking about data from, I'll call it soil organic matter, soil quality aspects and what that can do, but also technologies, whether it's measurement technologies. I was in Europe last week and someone was talking about adding nitrogen fixing bacteria to the soil as a way. So
please begin wrapping up your comment.
So I just thinking about how to, as I say, what's necessary from that regulatory perspective and what's the quality of what we know we can do on the agronomic side and where the opportunities are, really being very clear on that.
Thank you. All right, and I do apologize. We received a request from Tien Tran, who's joining staff in the room. Tien, please.
This is Tien Tran, Policy Manager from Community Water Center, and just really appreciate the expert panel for having such a robust discussion today, and really appreciate how much the panel members were focusing on the questions and focusing on what data is needed to figure out how we can set targets on nitrogen application and discharge. And I think, the data is showing that current nitrogen discharges cause really high levels of nitrate concentration in groundwater dependent communities. And we need to set targets, especially for dischargers who are the largest offenders. And we can look at the science that was used to develop that discharge value to make sure that we're meeting water quality objectives. So just want to stress, and really support a lot of the recommendations that we're talking about, setting interim targets to reduce discharges for the highest offenders, and, continue to just focus on the questions and make sure that, we get the draft report out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. Are there any additional members of the public who would like to provide comment? And I encourage you to use the hand raise feature to enter the queue. All right. Seeing none, Daniel, I guess I'll hand it back to you for closing comments, and then I don't know if Karen Mogus as well. I know you have a flight to catch soon, but it'd be great to hear your final thoughts as well.
Well, thank you. I just like to thank everybody for organizing my fellow panel members to participating in the discussion, everybody listening, and for the comments we received. I think we had a great discussion, and I'm looking forward to our next meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Well, and I'll just echo Dr. Geisler's thanks, and really appreciated the great discussion today. And again, you are exceeding my expectations. You're all great. Really appreciate the thoughtful comments, and looks like we've got at least one panel member that wants to jump in. So maybe we're not quite ready to close off yet. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I just for Richard and I writing this next week, are we going to get a minutes or summary from the water board prior of this meeting, or?
Yes.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thomas, you had a hand up as well.
Very short question too. In terms of process, we can reach out to people that have spoken if you want more information, or any other people that we feel like we need information from to bring into our deliberations.
For your two-person teams?
No, for me, even for me, just individually.
Yes, of course. If you need to reach out to anybody, Bagley Keen only regulates your contact with each other and how you all communicate.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying.
Of course. All right.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the great facilitation again, and great discussion. Look forward to seeing you again next week.
Okay.
Onward.
Thank you.
Thank you.